my name is Amy, and I am working on this project with a bunch of awesome partners. You can find out all about them and more about the project on the page that I've linked previously. We are going to be having workshop number 2 today by Inga. If there's at any time you have any questions or anything during the workshop, please don't hesitate to use the raise the hand function, which you can do by clicking on the reactions button in the bottom of your Zoom window and click on the raise hand, or feel free to just, if you don't have that option, because sometimes different accounts don't have that one, just click any of those reaction buttons and we'll, yeah, exactly, Robin's got it. And we'll, make sure to catch that and take any questions or comments that you have. Si vous avez des questions durant la session, n'hésitez pas à utiliser la fonction de lever la main qui se trouve en bas dans la petite ligne en bas de votre fenêtre Zoom où il y a plein de boutons différents. Il y en a une qui est réaction. Si vous cliquez là-dessus, vous pouvez voir une petite main et vous pouvez utiliser ça pour nous aviser que vous avez une question. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Inga, who will lead us through this second workshop.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Amy. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm actually joining you from Whitehorse, Yukon. So I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Kwanadun First Nation and Tan-Kwachang Council, self-governing nations here in the Yukon. It's a very different framework from what most people in Southern Canada are used to. And I'm very grateful to be living in this place. What we're talking about today is creating web content that connects with your audience. So the way I want to get at that is perhaps a little bit different from just discussing good English or persuasiveness or things of that nature, and instead to sort of both take a step back and look at the reason why we write things. That was what sort of the homework was about. So homework is basically for us just a way to try to make sure for those of you who have a few minutes that you can take in advance to get your head into the space of what the workshop is about. It's not actually going to be graded in any way. And then I want to sort of talk to you about, sort of because of the way that the web now works, it's not just brochureware anymore, which is what sort of the initial versions of the web were. We basically put all our content up and magically people were able to find it. And often the only way to find it initially was to actually make sure that they had your web address, your URL. So that's like mid-1990s, the early version. By the early 2000s, search engines started to actually tell us what they were doing. So, the early ones would have been things like Alta Vista, if you can remember that far back. Today, Google is the primary sort of search engine in the world. So I tend to refer to Google, but it matches, sort of how the majority of them work and how they interpret the world. So I want to take that layer of how search engines actually interpret your content to help us understand how you might want to write it. So those are the two pieces that I'm going to try to cover today in the time that we've got. The first thing I'd like to do is to ask you about, to ask anyone who had a chance to look at sort of the homework piece, some of those basic questions around what, I meant to have that in view. To ask some basic questions about sort of what you want to accomplish with your website, who your target audiences are. So I want to invite you to actually unmute yourself and jump in. I know one of you actually sent your homework in advance, so I know at least one of you actually did it. Right, Michelle? But yeah, so they were really basic questions just to kind of reflect for a moment on what do you want to accomplish with your website? Why do you have one? Go ahead, Eileen. If you want to just unmute yourself and jump in,
I'm working on it. Yeah.
Yes.
Pulling the plug, find the button. Yeah, I think it's an interesting reminder about why one does what one does, and whether it is a brochure unit or whether it is, you know, so that reframing of how you speak to whoever and how your content evolves. So we run a puppet festival, which has a particular demographic that we presume to be reaching to parents and grandparents of children, presumably up to the age of 12, but we also have adult puppetry. And how does one, you know, address even the knowledge of puppetry? And so that is a broad conversation about even educating people about its existence. And so how does one do that? And because we're a multidisciplinary festival, we also do new works programming. And so we have 3 sections the way we're structured right now. And so, you know, are people even interested in new works? How, you know, which is the ongoing discussion about how do people discover, what is the point of new work, why would you bother? So there's an educative piece to, and an invitation. And so, you know, it's the degree, how can you get focused? How can you get clear about what your point of existence is in your own story? And then writing that content so you're reaching to people that you think are like-minded people, as opposed to everybody on the planet. There is obviously, there are enough people out there that you think theoretically are interested in the same things that you are interested in. So how do you craft something that is reaching to them? Then as an ongoing feature, we obviously put programming on, so we'd like people to attend our programming. And so that is, you know, bums on seats or give us money. So
Right.
that's where I'm at. Whether we're effectively doing that, I feel probably deeply not. And a lot of the stuff that the reading that I've done recently is about engagement and giving your audiences what they want and feeling that they're being heard and feeling that they're in some manner, you know, that you're sufficiently clear about what you're offering and the conversation is happening and that the audience people are perceived to be valued. So that's my generalized story.
Yeah, that last point you're making, Eileen, is quite interesting. It certainly is. It's harder to accomplish on a website, engagement, right? It tends to be more transactional than that. Not impossible, but harder to accomplish. And a lot of that narrative around engagement really comes from social media, right? Social media being intrinsically social. So we'll talk a little bit about that next week as well. So, but that's, yeah, it's interesting because I mean, I think whenever you can accomplish engagement, that's a huge win. And understanding how the different pieces of your web presence can serve that is part of the trick, right? Michelle, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the website that you're working with, its goals, and share that with the rest of us as well? You just want to find out, you know, the unmute tends to be at the...
Sure.
There we are.
Yeah, I should make it clear right from the outset that I'm certainly not the webmaster. One of our board members, fortunately, is, and she couldn't be here. She had a conflict, but she's going to be listening to the recording.
Awesome.
And she just designs and updates it and so on. And I simply feed her the information for it. You asked the question, how well does your current web content take into consideration what your audience wants? Yeah, I really didn't know how to answer that, except to say that I'd say probably 75% of our registrations, which come from all over North America, find us through Googling and our website, and they register online for our courses. So that plus social media, that's pretty much it for the way we promote our program. So we have a very broad audience. There's not a demographic that we don't try to address, except maybe under the age of 16. Our students have to be able to handle saws and welding machines and so on. So we do limit it to 16 plus, but yeah, we fill almost every course, and we do that strictly through they're finding us on the website and their social media.
Cool. Yeah, certainly 75% it's an impressive stat, right?
That could be an exaggeration.
No, that's okay. We'll make up numbers, but
it would be 60 at least.
Yeah. No, and that's also a business model question, right? Like when your audience is geographically distributed, like it's not a location, right? If you're doing live events often, what you're used to is a location that you need to bring people together physically, which is different from being able to have a, sort of a much broader reach. And then the way that you use online, the way that you use your website tends to be quite different, right? Which is what you're describing. So I
I should
appreciate that.
mention one other thing in
Yes.
relation to that 60% or 75%. And that is that many of our students are repeat students. So when they come to us by way of the web, it's because they know we're here, they've taken our courses before,
Mhm,
and they're signing up again. So that's a big portion of our
mhm.
population,
Awesome.
student population.
Thank you. Rachel.
Hi, yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel from SPARC, Supporting Performing Arts in Rural and Remote Communities. Yeah, we desperately need a new website. We're actually, and this is like top secret, but we're going through a rebrand right now. And part of that is driven by the fact that our website is a bit of a Frankenbeast. It's a bit clunky. It's not as modern. It's not as reflective of rural and remote practitioners as the current demographics are. And so we want to make that a little more slick, but also a lot more user-friendly. We have a built-in member site, but like I was a member before I was staff and I didn't know what to do there. And I still don't really know what to do there. So that proves to me that maybe it's not as beneficial as it could be. So it's something that we're definitely trying to work on and trying to meet the needs of an ever-evolving sort of ecosystem, I guess would be the word. So I'm excited, and I'm excited by our rebrand, and I'm excited to get this information from you. So thanks.
Yeah, the members side, is that primarily still the discussion forum?
No one ever does anything on it. And also we had a Facebook members group that was private, but I think we're sort of segueing to everything being open and transparent and public, so that we can reach more people. So yeah, we're trying to sort of find out how to connect our network online in a way that works for everybody.
Yeah. All right, anybody else who wants to chime in for a couple of moments? I think earlier a couple of you might have unmuted yourself, so if you want to go ahead and jump in, that would be great. Robin.
I'll just speak really quickly. Like now I'm in the same boat where my website is a bit of a Frankenbeast and is in desperate need of an update. I'm talking about my personal website here. But one of the things that mine, and I know others, is there to do is to promote the artist. And I think the words bums in seats were used already, getting money. So yeah, part of my website should be working to let people know what I do and where they can get it and how they can find it and how they can give me money. So that's, yeah, one thing my website is failing dramatically at right now.
What would you feel that your website is actually good at right now?
Well, part of it is I am also transitioning my business. Before times I was a toy maker, so the website has a whole lot of information about toys. I want to keep some of that stuff. I've got like historical information about the folk toy that I made. I want to keep some of that stuff, but I don't actively sell on it. I think my brain's frying a bit from whatever the question actually was.
No, it's just what your website actually is trying to accomplish. So my follow-up for you was simply, what is it good at right now? And it sounds like from your answer, what it's good at right now is to share some interesting information for those who are interested. Yeah, and I've gotten, people have connected with me through the website, but I have no search engine optimization happening whatsoever right now. I'm okay with that. I'm in pandemic hibernation right now. Sure. But all of this information, I am taking extensive notes for ongoing for the time to come. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. It's good to see you again. Anybody else?
I can just quickly go.
Yeah.
We spoke about our website at Clean Creations after the workshop last week, and we were finding this disconnect between the things we thought that we wanted our website to accomplish, but then what, like you're talking about, what it was actually doing already. So we decided to, in answering those questions, sort of reframe some of those things. Like, for example, we instinctively were like, well, we want our website to sell tickets. But then we also realized that the majority of the things we're talking about online, posting about online, and even doing is not shows all the time. There are moments where that is important, but there's much more of the year at this point in our company's life that is not focused on tickets. And we found that we have a high success rate with finding like young volunteers in our area. And because they need to do that for high school, and people are interested in the arts as an opportunity for volunteering where we are. So that has become something that we think we can lean into more than we thought, based on how that has been something that has come more easily to our website based on, I'm not sure exactly what, but that has come to the surface by itself. So that was very interesting to kind of realize.
Yeah, part of what you're headed there for is sort of this acknowledgement of that you actually can have really different audiences, and depending on who's important at any given moment in time to you, you actually need to make different choices, or you need to sort of dedicate a place on your website, so to have a dedicated page perhaps to an audience and to a particular kind of a need. Volunteering is interesting, right? Because yeah, the 40 hours are a thing. And for an arts organization, 40 hours can be quite a lot of, support if you can harness that, right? But that's not something that would necessarily be top of mind for, that's the business I'm in, is to provide volunteer hours to people, right? The business you're in tends to be artistic practice. And a bunch of reasons around that, and a bunch of motivations that can be not always about selling tickets. They can be about other things too, right? But leading people to what it is you want, and understanding who you're leading there, is kind of the important piece of that, right? Jean-Marie, did you want to jump in as well?
Hi, yes. Thank you for this. So my company does a multitude of things, and I'm much like Eileen in that I'm trying to get people to purchase tickets, but we also produce original work, and we also consult on projects. We're mostly puppet centric, but not completely. So I feel like right now what we've been doing is trying to be a destination site for puppet artists, but once they've been there, how do you get them back? And so we've been trying to use social media to leverage new events, but that's a big challenge. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts on when things are like a multi-platform use kind of thing.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, we won't talk about that aspect quite so much today, but I think as you're coming through the workshops, you'll see some good hints on how these pieces work together, and trying to sort of sharpen and hone that is a big challenge. That's really important, right? And it's usually driven by exactly what you're describing. And I think, Amy, you said that as well. It's like you have events only so much of the year, and then what's the rest of the time doing, right? And you need to, what you're after is, top of mind awareness, right? So when I'm ready to check you out again, like that, you're actually in my consideration set, right? That you haven't just kind of dropped off into the ether on me. And that tends to require more continuous communications, not just, I got an event, it's in 4 weeks, buy tickets. And then you got nothing for 6 months, depending, right, on the scenario. How many of you have actually really thought about in detail who your target audience is? Not just demographics, that includes psychographics. What kind of people, not just how old are they and where do they live. Some, yeah, maybe. So part of what can happen is, when you think about that early in the development of your web presence, you may find that you haven't rethought it in a while. And you may find some benefit in actually rethinking, are those really the people who are coming? I know sometimes in the arts, there's the self-fulfilling thing where where you think that you've designed a thing for a particular person, you did that really well. 3 years go by, 5 years go by, and you continue to serve who that initial audience was, but your audience may have actually changed some, right? It may have evolved a little bit, and that can be hard to track, especially when you have small numbers. Like you're not, having millions of users, where you can do really awesome segmentation. You might have a few hundred or a few thousand, so it's a lot harder to see sometimes. It is worthwhile to rethink. And at this time with COVID and COVID recovery, many of us have sort of had this really discontinuous experience, right? So that rebuilding might be the opportunity we all need to rethink that. So I want to show you just a really fun image to sort of hone in a little bit more on understanding audience and understanding motivation. Anything stand out to you when you look at this image? She's the only one paying attention to me. So we tend to be in the sea of potential audience. But the trick is, who am I really targeting? What do they want? And what do I want them to do? Right? And connecting that up is what this is all about, right? So I think it was Arlene early on who said about, we need to give people what they want and need to cater to their motivations, basically. And that is kind of true, but especially when you're in the mode of creating new work, what you actually need to do is to understand people's motivations, not only for the purpose of giving them what they want, but for the purpose of connecting your new creation or your new artistic thing or your new whatever it is you're doing, your new workshop with that audience, right? So it's more about leading people to the art you're making or leading people to the experiences that you're creating, as opposed to just giving them what they want. If I gave people in classical music what they want, I would just play Beethoven's Ninth all the time. It's a diminishing return issue, right? Because what people know is too narrow. And especially in the creation process, you're continuously giving them things they don't know. So what you need to get good at is, in fact, to understand what are the familiar pieces in what you're doing that people can relate to. So familiar, the reason why Beethoven's Ninth works, right, is because I know Beethoven, one of the top classical composers on earth, and the Ninth happens to be the one that we can all sing the last movement from, the few words that are in that thing. So it's strictly familiarity that makes everybody say Beethoven. And by the way, who's the other classical composer everybody knows? That's correct. It's Mozart. As soon as you go beyond that, right, people get baffled about who the hell is Mendelssohn and Bach and Tchaikovsky. That's the second tier, right? Let alone if you're what they call a living composer. Good luck on that, right? So unless you're John Williams, and I won't know that you're John Williams unless you tell me it's Star Wars, like the big epic Hollywood movies, right? I have a hard time relating. So you're in a similar place, right, where people might have become familiar with your company or with your organization or with a certain quality of work you do or a certain sensibility of work. And what you're going to be looking for is to for those people that know you, to connect them to that familiarity and lead them to the new piece of work, right? It's one of the reasons why reviews are so powerful, right? Where you get to say, you've liked what I've done, or somebody has liked what I've done, and it's an endorsement. We also get to say, it's like that, like you're gonna love it, like that piece I did 2 years ago, which you came to. Like those are simply connecting points to your thing. You don't always have the luxury of Beethoven or Mozart to drop those names, right? Or Shakespeare, or like, you see where I'm headed there in terms of the top line familiarity. Like, I'd be a great programmer in all of these artistic disciplines for exactly one season. Because I do the top 3 ballets, I do the top 10 classic, right? It'd be easy for one season. But the task is not that. The task is not to do top 10 stuff. The task is to lead your audience and potential audience to your thing, right? And so that's where you need to understand a little bit about their motivations. The artistic impetus is often quite different from the audience impetus to do a thing. So for audiences, if I was to ask audience members why they're going to a live arts event of any sort, their top answers tend to be about wanting to be entertained. And what's tricky about that answer for many of us is that we're not necessarily in the business to entertain. We might be in the business to provoke, or we might be in the business to generate an interesting conversation, or we might be in the business of just doing really cool toy design and have really interesting interactions of those things, or right? So entertainment may not in fact be our number one driver, but it often comes back in a survey. So what I tend to encourage folks to think about is the secondary drivers, because that's when you get quickly into, I want to be stimulated intellectually. I want to escape. I want to have an experience other than my day-to-day life is really all that means. It doesn't mean frivolous entertainment necessarily at all, like in that facile sense of entertainment, right? But it means I want to engage my full being in a way that I don't have a chance to do during my regular work in life. And when you get to those pieces, that's much more interesting for us, right? Because that's when you start to connect and say, oh, if people are, like a lot of folks listening to classical music do that for their, spiritual, purposes. Great. There's a segment, maybe 10% of your audience where that is a driver. If you can find them, you can connect with them, right? You can sort of say, here's what this is about. Part of this music is about. If part of what they're after in theater, all theater often is really about intellectual stimulation. It's about, I want to explore a topic. I want to think about something. And I want to have a point of view that I can, resonate against or with, right? Whichever way that works. And so that sense of a new piece, it's not that it's new as a piece that is so interesting, but the topic that it might be exploring, or how it is exploring something, or who it's inviting into that conversation can actually be really interesting. And I might find that entertaining. Like that would be my top line answer, right? You're entertaining for a couple of hours. But what's really going on is not just I'm checking out like when I'm watching television. I'm actually checking in, right? So that's really worthwhile thinking about, because it changes perhaps how you write content on your website. It might change how you invite people if you have a bit of an understanding of why they're coming to this. And help you sort of, like one of the critiques we often hear, it's like a joke, how many superlatives we use. It's the best show, most something show, to try to describe our works. And that doesn't really work because it doesn't have any credibility against it. Even if it's true, it's really hard, to sort of sell that. Especially for relatively recent work you've just created. But what's not difficult to do is to invite me into the experience that you're creating, right? And that's a different thing than to go for that, fairly traditional performing arts way of selling. Some of you may be doing that really well at this point, right? So I'm only talking about that sort of, so if you're doing that well right now, kudos on you. And if there's some food for thought here for you, make sure you think about it for yourself in your context, right? There's cultural differences that are quite significant between different parts of the population. If I think about how Quebecers consume and participate in cultural experiences, it's actually quite different from English Canadians. There is a much more European slant to our artists are our most important thinkers, right? They're our conscience, which is what I'm used to growing up out of Germany. I actually want to know what somebody's opinion on a current affair thing is. I don't want them to be limiting themselves to just creating and presenting their art. That's not how English Canada works so much. We don't necessarily care what our artists think about current affairs or the current conversations. So there's, for instance, we don't really have a lot of media that invites that. In English Canada, all I can think of is maybe what is now called Q, right? The radio show on CBC. While in Quebec, you get, a bunch of talk shows that do that. Current affairs talk shows, not artistic talk shows, right? Very, very different. So you got to be aware of your cultural context as well when you're sort of doing some of this. Now, I think on the slide here, it says something about 2 to 3 user sort of tasks or user cases. What that really comes down to is to simply say, oh, I'm only doing 2 shows a year. So one of my user cases should be to make sure that this audience member or potential audience member can leave something behind for me that allows me to connect with them again. And that is usually their email. And it's usually for the purpose of connecting with them through email marketing, not only to sell shows, but to actually foster a relationship. And today you might also use social media for that, right? So to have invitations in to a relationship with you is different than to simply sell stuff when you have things to sell. The relationship part is important because it allows you some top of mind access, right? Where being in my email, even if I don't read it all the time and I don't open it all the time, but by virtue of you being there, there is a familiarity that gets generated. So when you send me the thing with a subject line that's about the next event you're doing, that lands differently for me than if I haven't heard from you since the last event and all you're after is my money, right? Transaction is not a relationship. Transaction is fine. I wouldn't ding it. But your odds of, getting the next sale, and I think that's part of what, Michelle, you're talking about, towards the repeat customer, right? It works the same for workshops as it does for any other live event, where the relationship building, I evaluate it by the quality of the last experience I had. I evaluate that by the quality and my judgment of quality, whatever I was after, not an objective judgment of quality. And I'll evaluate it by, how did you feed this relationship meanwhile, right? To get out of just, I want your money, I get your money, and repeat that process. Is that an interesting sort of train of thought to try to apply here? Because I'm doing this strictly from the standpoint of how you structure your content, of course. Right, but what I'm talking about is marketing 101, right? Know your audience, understand what they're after, understand what you're offering, and figure out how to connect that for the purpose of building the kind of relationships you need for sale, for relationship, for advancing conversations, for advancing skill, right? Whichever part of that you're working in. Oh yeah, and then here's my one friend, right, who actually turns around. So you are dealing with especially when you're using Google a lot to position yourself, or your primary using search engine optimization and things like that. You're in a sea of billions of people, right? But your market is a subsegment of that, and your ready market is an even smaller segment of that. And then it's that day, it's that time, it's that dollar amount narrows your market even further, right? So sort of that moving people from, I'm aware of you, to I'm aware of the thing you're doing in the next little bit, to I'm available to participate in that, right? There's a narrowing of that an attrition basically that we all go through. So it is useful to sort of try to understand how that works, in fact. Now I want to show you a couple of quick examples, and you don't have to be able to read this. Amy, you saw Robin's note there. Robin's having some Zoom issues. We can actually see Robin, great, but you can't see the screen. Aha, you gotta go do a thing, and absolutely. Yeah. We'll make sure Amy lets you in. Thanks. What I want to show you here, so this is my one of my websites that I manage for my own business, and you don't have to be able to read this. I'm gonna just point out a couple of things. So on the slightly bigger image is what my website looks like, and the smaller image is a Google search results page. And I just want to point out a couple of things about how Google interprets your content. So you see that, that little gray box at the top of your bars of the web browser. That thing at the very top, you'll see it in any web browser that you have open. Anybody know what that's called? Yes, what's it called?
Favicon?
So the graphic is the favicon. What's the text called that sits beside it? Where does that come from? That's called your title tag. So every web page should have a title tag. And the reason why it's so important, so this is not something that shows up in the content of your web page as you see, it just shows up in that gray little bar at the top. But the reason why it's critically important is because guess what it becomes on the Google search results page? It becomes the blue headline, the most prominent piece of information about you that a Google search will return. So every page needs to have a unique title tag. Don't just use your company name, but it needs to have a unique title tag that is actually about the content on that page, because it becomes the headline on a search result. And it's an opportunity for very keyword rich text that does great as a headline. So don't call your homepage home. Like my homepage isn't called home, it's called Strategic Moves Thinking Business. That's my company name and its tagline. And it uses keywords. There's 3 keywords in there. Moves is not a keyword. That's just what my company is called. Too generic for a keyword, unless I'm in the moving business, right? Which I'm not. But the other 3 are actually, keywords that position my business. Yours might be, I don't know. Let me venture wildly. Puppetry, crane, theater creations, for instance, could be your homepage title. Not home, crane, theater creations. The other piece that you know that Google always gives you the URL, and the URL that has your business name or your organization name or your whatever, your personal name, whatever the thing is that you're really marketing. And it does a lot better than, acronyms or numeric things or some kind of abbreviation of some sort. It helps people to feel reassured that they're in the right place. And then the next piece that you're seeing in the Google search result is a sentence for my website. And it says, Strategic Moves is an insight-driven consultancy that operates at the crossroads of research, strategy, and marketing. We provide a full spectrum of blah, blah, blah. That sentence is the first actual sentence in the body text of my homepage. And Google will always take the first sentence of your any page on your website and put that into its sort of search result here. You need to know that. Google might also use the description tag on your website. That's something that you fill in when you generate web content in any sort of do-it-yourself marketing website package, WordPress, Weebly, Wix, anything like that. That's what it would be doing. So if you know all of this, those are just 3 things, right? But if you know that that's what search engines do with your content, does it change how you might construct or what you think about when you write content for your web pages? Anybody shocked? Anybody ever wonder where that text comes from and how Google picks it up in terms of the description piece? So one of the things this means to you, and I said this, I think, I said this in the assessment workshop the other day. One of the things it means to you is that you need to understand that your paragraphs of text on the page need to begin with the punchline. Because the punchline is what the search engine picks up. It's the first sentence. So in the old style of writing or magazine style of writing, right? What you're doing is you're telling me a bunch of stuff. You're telling me what you're going to be telling me about, and then you're telling me the thing, and then, right? That way of writing actually kills you because nobody gives you that amount of time. You're not a magazine, you're a website, right? And we read websites differently from magazines, even though many of us were taught to write them in that way. You need to consider that for many people, even if they know you really well, their first interface is going to be on Google. They will see your events on Google first because they're going to Google you, even if they know your URL. Let's just get over this, right? So the first place I see your event listing is also on Google. You need to know this, right? Because it might change how you structure your event listing. You might need to figure out what the connecting piece is for audience motivation to that new piece of work that you're promoting. And you might need to have that in the first sentence, not just in the title. Titles for artistic products are really interesting animals. We're not going to get too distracted by that. Most of the titles are not that meaningful from an audience standpoint, and most of them never become marketable. Like it's not Beethoven's Ninth, right? It's not Shakespeare's Hamlet. It's not these, you know, super well-known things that people relate to. So titles aren't necessarily, you know, your best bet on marketing, but your first sentence has to be. And then the description text, really, really important. So what I'm after, again, you know, is this connection of writing for humans is really important, but also understanding how the search engine, how the machine tries to understand your content and how it uses that, right? Any questions, comments at this point? So let's give you a moment to check in here. All right. Quick question. Brianne, have you ever actually managed to over-engage? Like, if you want to unmute yourself and just talk to me about what you mean by over-engage.
Yes. Is there no limit to, you know, how much we should be posting or sending out? Is there such a thing as too much, or is it kind of just a rule of as much as you can do is great?
So it depends on the medium. If you're putting out, you know, and I mean, I think this is when you get outside of your website as well, right? So the typical process that most of us would use that is useful is that you maintain your website. When there's new stuff happening, you add new stuff, right? That might be a blog post, that might be a behind the scenes kind of a thing. When you're in development, that might be other valuable content leading up to, you know, a show actually happening, and then it's a show marketing. So when you say how many times can I put something out, the question is, can I push my valuable content or my interesting content about the work I'm doing before the show marketing happens, right? Is that right?
Yeah, kind of in the off seasons, as you were talking about before, what that might look like.
Yeah, so the answer depends on what you're using. If you're sending me emails every day, I'm going to be really annoyed, right? So you're better off to generate an email marketing program that might be monthly or even every 2 months, and that consolidates information, and that reminds me why I love you, and it reminds me of great things you've done in the past, you know, in very simple, easy ways. That could just be a review, or a reminder of something that happened, or it could be a photo of some previous thing. And then you're telling me about, you know, the cool stuff you're working on now. That can't be happening daily, because you'll just end up being in my spam folder. If you're using Twitter a lot, you can post every 5 hours, because the half-life of a Twitter post is incredibly short. If you do that on Facebook, you know, your Facebook friends might get annoyed though, right? Because Facebook has a slightly longer shelf life, and engagement happening on Facebook will promote the post up in my newsfeed a lot. So, you know, once a day or once every couple of days or once every 3 days is a ton on Facebook. And you do need to be thoughtful around what you're sharing, right? Because people are not going to be engaging unless it's valuable to them. So part of what happens often, I think you're describing this here a little bit, is that when you have the show coming up, you're able to generate far more excitement than if you're trying to get me engaged on, you know, sort of the narrative of the creation process, or the narrative of what other people say about it, or the narrative of who's in that show or what's in that show, right? And you end up sort of talking to a slice of your audience in the interim that I would call your ambassadors or evangelists or proponents, that end up amplifying your message. by the time that the sell happens. So you do need to spend a little bit of time thinking about, different, like your audience is not always your audience. There's different segments within your audience that will actually use that content much more powerfully, and it's not the wider mass. It might be only 10 or 15% of your audience that engages in some of these, but they become the knowledgeable ambassador by the time the sell happens, right? So you need to think that through a little bit from a marketing sort of, process standpoint. And you may not be able to say, oh, that didn't get 100 likes like my show stuff does, or whatever your number is, right? So therefore I shouldn't be doing it. It's like the lower engagement might actually be higher quality, and you need to sort of figure out if there's something that you can understand, even when you have relatively small numbers of users or audience members in these media, how they're using that, and to encourage some of that. Does that make sense as an answer to you?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think there is such a thing as over engaging. I think there is such a thing as spamming. And I think maybe that's what you mean when you say over engaging, like that people just get tired of you. Is that part of where you were headed there?
Yeah, it's just the fear of when do we cross the point of overdoing it? We want there to be excitement often.
So the two measures that I often look at when I'm worried about that is I look at my e-news unsubscribe rates. If they start to get out of hand, I know I'm doing something that my target audience doesn't like, or maybe people signed up that just weren't in my audience. So it can be useful to actually collect people's cities, for instance, in your e-news sign up, not just their email addresses. And what you'll find is that I came to one show, but I actually live 5,000 kilometers away from you. If I unsubscribe, you're not going to worry about it, right? But if your local audience, your local catchment, the people that you think should be there start to unsubscribe, then you need to really think about what you're doing. Same on Facebook. If you're seeing, like if you have a business page, you get a lot of statistics. And if you're seeing drop-off rates because people are feeling like it's just not relevant content anymore, they will actually unfollow you, or they will mute the post, right? And you see stats on that. So I would look for those things as telltales of when something is wonky or weird. I wouldn't worry about I get less engagement on the post per se, right? Because that can be many reasons for that, including you posted it at 1 a.m. in the morning and the Facebook algorithm now disadvantages you. Right, but you need to post stuff when people are online to get immediate engagement, and then you start to, it's self-fulfilling. So there's many variables why your engagement numbers can be lower, but the telltale tends to be people are basically dropping off from you. They stop following, and stuff like that. That's a more useful measure to figure out if you're doing something that annoys people. I want to give you okay, are there questions, comments?
Just a question about how much you actually ask your existing people what they want in a direct address. So it's been suggested to me in other situations where you ask your newsletter people, do you want it once a week? Do you want it once a month? Do you want it whatever you want? What is your thing?
Yeah, if you have yes, in that sense, I think that's useful in terms of e-news frequency. That should be part of the sign up, but it requires you to actually deliver on it. Right. So if somebody says, I want weekly content, you better have weekly content. So don't offer things you can't do. It might be helpful to say, do you want, only show information, or do you or do you want, other content throughout the year? That might be really helpful, but be aware, if you ask me, you got to deliver that. So what that means is that part of your list might get an email twice a year. Right? Because it's like whatever your frequency of events is, or a festival or things like that. And another part of your list is going to get a monthly email from you, right? So it is important that when you raise those expectations that you deliver on them, and that you do it really well. So, but yeah, so that's helpful. When you're developing new work, one of the things you will have realized that you can't ask your audience what they want. Like your artistic practice is your artistic practice. What you can ask audiences about in sensible ways is how to communicate about it. right? How to make it something that they feel like they want to participate in. But that's a marketing survey. That's not a content of the artistic work survey. And that can be useful. What I find not useful is to ask people how they receive information. We know how they receive information. That's not a useful question. And you end up with the same answers all the time. And the top answer is always word of mouth. Which is a ridiculous answer, because the only way that word of mouth gets generated is because you did marketing. Right? So be aware that some of those questions don't actually return particularly useful information. People will tell you that they have seen your information on Facebook because you're on Facebook. And if you're not on TikTok, TikTok will not make the list. That doesn't mean they're not on TikTok. You see what I'm saying there? So you got to be really thoughtful about that. And you're better off to look at media trends when you're trying to figure out what media to use than to ask your own audience where they're finding out about you. The only place they can find out about you is where you actually are, right? So that's not particularly helpful. Even though, and I mean, people always ask me to include that in surveys when we do them, and I always explain to them why not to do it. And then when they insist, then I'll do it. They'll understand, the second time around why that wasn't so helpful from a decision-making standpoint. So we have about just over 20 minutes. So these are 75-minute sessions, right? So hopefully you can stick around until quarter past. I want to share sort of my top tips on how to write your website for people. Authentic voice, who you are, critically important. No secret there. You got to know who you are, and you got to figure out how to connect that cool thing you are with audiences. Figuring out, how to connect your purpose with their motivations is what we've been talking about. But then what's the next thing you do? The next thing you do is you think about your most important keywords. What you're after is balancing. So think about your keywords first, right? And think about, if it's an event you're marketing, think about the keywords related to that event. We know you're in puppetry or multidisciplinary arts or live arts or live, or performing arts. Like, we know that category, and that'll always be there. It has to be there. But what are the next layers of things that are really, really important for that show? And try to pick keywords that people actually use to search. So don't be so unique. Don't coin terms. Not helpful from a search engine standpoint. I mean, coin terms all you want. Don't use them in your SEO, search engine optimization work. So these keywords I mean here are the ones that are helping position your content online, and that are helping people to sort of connect to it. And what you're after is to balance an interesting read that flows really well with a consistent use of keywords. So I don't need 5 ways to say performing arts. I need 1 way to say performing arts, right? I don't need to say 5 different things that really just mean puppetry. I just need to say puppetry or puppeteering or something like that, or a derivative thereof, right? And then in your text, you get to explain and expound, and that's great. But think about the keywords first. And then, yes, it does make sense to have an easy to scan page, because most people, you do this, I do this, we scan web pages, we don't read them. We only read them after we've determined that they're interesting to us. So using headings, using images from an editorial standpoint, and not creating a crazy visual experience by highlighting, bolding, and 5 colors on the page. Most of us have gotten pretty good about not doing that stuff. Is really, really helpful. And then the next piece that happens is you want to hook people from the first line. That's my point about the punchline first. The longer you've been a writer, the more counterintuitive this is. It may not be how your artistic creation process works at all, right? Like, because when you create art, there's you have people in a room with you, you have time with them. They're not going to just walk out after the first 4 seconds, but they're going to walk out of your web page after the first 4 seconds, unless you hook them, right? So finding and using your own voice, that can be tricky. Every piece is unique and different. But there's a quality perhaps that you're after, or there's a familiar voice that you want to use, or there is maybe an irreverent kind of approach that you use. Like, figure out what that is you. And have some fun with that. I would encourage you not to explain your art, but to show it. And I would encourage you not to justify your art, but to simply be it fully. So the reason why I say this is, for those of you who are in puppetry or in a subdomain of theater, or maybe in a subdomain of literature, in fact. And I have some colleagues in the storytelling world who for years tried to explain to people what storytelling is, because they felt like that would somehow make a difference to the purchase decision. And what they've discovered is they're just down the rabbit hole of trying to explain the art form as opposed to just showing it to me. We all intrinsically relate to the oldest art forms we have, which arguably are storytelling and puppetry, right? Like the idea of having a thing to represent something else is ancient. We don't have to explain it. We relate to that really intuitively as humans. And I do see some of the websites that just explain the stuff, and I'm kind of going like, yeah, but that's no longer interesting. Like, don't justify your existence. Be the cool selves you are, or the interesting selves that you are, and show it to me. Right. So which is a little bit different, I think. Writing clearly. Sometimes we get too academic, we get too cerebral. Well, really, the experience you're offering is really visceral. It's really kinetic, right? It's really connecting heart to heart, not brain to brain. It can do both. But all I'm trying to say is, make sure that that you're easy to understand, that your text is easy to scan. I'm the worst at writing really long sentences because in my original language, that's what we do. And in my original language, which is German, everybody understands me. In English, that doesn't work so well. So I keep kind of going like, okay, where can I put the period? one thought in a sentence, not 10. Right? It's really helpful practice because it's easier to understand that way. The other thing that I want to say to you is read your own text out loud. Right? Because that's when you start to realize quickly what kind of text you wrote. Is it easy to understand or not? Can you in fact read it out loud? I made this crib about my bio that's online. When people try to read that as part of like a conference proceedings to introduce me, they always stumble like crazy and they sound horrible. It's not written to be read out loud. It's written to be read on a page, right? So you need to be aware of that. So do that, and it'll improve your writing a lot. And then the last piece is actually have a call to action. So sometimes the call to action is sign up to the e-news to find out about the stuff we're doing. And sometimes the call to action is the show's on Friday. Here's the click to your ticket. So different pages, different calls to action. That's appropriate, right? And then how does this translate into coding? Really, really simply. So when we'll talk about SEO more in another workshop, but here's the top line on what you need to do right in this order. So you'll have the deck, of course, afterwards as well, and all of that. So you don't have to take super quick notes here. But what it basically comes down to is the web address is the most important thing. So use real words, not acronyms. In the old days, when you created a web page, there would be a bunch of database gobbledygook as part of the web address. That should just say whatever the title or the thing of your next event is. It should be plain English, because those are that important. Every event, every experience you have needs to have its own page. This can be particularly challenging for festivals where you end up doing a festival listing page. The listing page is fine, but each one of these things should lead to its own web page, right? Sometimes we don't do that because it's expedient not to, but it actually diminishes your ability to optimize for search. Yes, it also adds access for patrons, some of these things. Title tags, imaged alt tags are also accessibility features. That's absolutely true. And then the thing that you must create is your description meta tag. It's a real sentence, right? It becomes the sentence that Google might very well display about that particular page. Really important to do. The other places where your description tag might get used is in Twitter and Facebook and other social media when you're posting to them. So that sentence is important. right? You need to understand it gets used that way. And then some other things that are really important to Google is fast load times. So don't put high-res images on your pages that load really slowly. Don't have autoplay videos that load really slowly. Nobody wants that. People will make a decision about whether to stay on your page right then when it doesn't load quickly enough for my taste, right? And encryption, SSL, it's the HTTPS part of your website. Google favors sites that are secured, even if you don't have information going back and forth, like e-commerce information. Google will still favor HTTPS sites, so make sure that you have that little certificate on your page. These are the top things that you must do. So you see, I think clearly why I'm telling you to start with your keywords when you're writing your content, not with your content, right? Because it'll hone your practice significantly to actually get this right much more effortlessly. So I want to show you briefly how this looks on the web in your backend. You should be seeing, the backend of one of my websites here. It's a WordPress site. So every WordPress site, I manage like 4 different WordPress sites. They all have completely different backend look and feels, different templates. They all behave a little bit differently. This one uses like the WP Bakery page builder. It's like a almost a visual interface. What I want to show you here is the interplay of when I write content. I'm just going to drag this a little bit. I'm not sure. Can you actually read words on the page here? Might be a little bit small. Sort of good enough. The words themselves aren't the most important thing. I just want to talk about the structure of it. So here is my content. Here is what will show up on the website, right? It's got titles. It's got at the very top, it's got a title right here. It's got a permalink right here. You see, I can edit those even right underneath it. And then it goes into the body text, basically. And in this particular interface, there's a lot of boxes. It's kind of a nice interface. I can move boxes of text around really, really easily. Other sites I have behave differently. I've installed a thing called Yoast Seo. So here, it's a free. You can get the free plugin. It costs you nothing, or you can get the premium version for $99 a year. The free version works really, really well. And here it asks you for focus key phrase. It gives you a snippet of text here, and I can edit this. And you see how right here, this constructs my title tag, and they call it SEO title. But it really is the title tag on your page that generates. All you need to know when you use a tool like this is to make sure every field is filled in, and you're optimizing for search engines. It's as simple as that. Don't leave a field blank. It gives you the meta description right here. So I can type in stuff I want to type in there that may or may not match the first sentence of my content, right? But this is a really useful thing because that's what gets picked up in a lot of uses. Might be picked up by Google, definitely gets picked up by Facebook and Twitter when you're posting. It also builds in, so you don't have to actually know SEO, because a tool like that will give you quick analysis on how well you're doing. It'll tell you whether there are problem areas, whether there's things you could improve, and then it tells you what you're doing well. So red, it's a traffic light. So you don't have to remember all that stuff, right? This free tool will actually help you hone it. And this free tool does another really neat thing, which is a thing called readability. So this is geared towards English, not German. And it gives you some notions of how well you're doing on readability. So a lot of my stuff is not consumer oriented, it's business oriented. It's aiming at people like yourselves for the purpose of doing this kind of work. So I don't worry about the length of my sentences as much as you should if you're appealing to a run-of-the-mill consumer market. But it basically gives you an assessment of how well you're doing. Are you using passive voice enough or not enough? Are you, having a nice flow of, not every consecutive sentence should start with the same word. We do this, we do that, we do the other thing, right? So this is a really nice tool to actually hone the writing as well. And then you get this integration with social. Here it is for Facebook. You can even assign a unique image to it, and you can edit the text if you want. I can have a different title that shows up when I, put that URL into Facebook. I can have a unique description text that Facebook might well pick up, and I can do the same for Twitter. Those are the two it uses. Obviously, the rest of your social media presence, LinkedIn, whatnot, isn't accounted for here. But those two are. And Facebook is the biggest one for most of us. So what happens on this, what's interesting to me, what I'm going to make sure you understand, is what's happening on this page is that I am looking to my keywords. What is this page about? As I'm writing the content. So Michelle, you said earlier that you're giving the content to the person that manages your website. Are you also giving them what the title tag should be? Are you also giving them the description tag, right? Chances are you're not, because people traditionally haven't done that.
No, I'll be doing it from now on.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you don't do it, there's two options. It either doesn't get done, or your techie person applies their best judgment to it. But they may not apply the best judgment from an SEO standpoint. They might. I mean, sometimes they do. It's just unreliable. I find a lot of web developers don't do that correctly, like professionals in the field. They will just do what's expedient to them, right? So your home page is called home. Your staff page is called staff, as opposed to, strategic thinkers or puppetry artists or something like that, like keyword rich, right? So don't leave it up to them. Tell them what you want there. And you're in charge then, right? And you can say, oh, you didn't do the title tag. By the way, here's what I want that to say. Don't go back to the past in your website, right? Don't fix the past so much. Fix your main pages if they're not showing up in the way that you want. And move forward, basically, would be my advice. On a lot of my pages, I don't get green because I make my own judgments. So I know what I'm after. I know how it works. It's not necessarily bad not to get green for SEO or readability all the time, right? You are adults. You get to make your own judgments too. I just want to, that's the reason why I'm showing you this thing here with a couple of orange pieces as well. From a standpoint of how we construct a page and what I'm proposing you do, is this like an interesting train of thought that we're looking at here?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
On WordPress, which we also use, and probably on other platforms as well, we do some things as pages and some things as posts.
Yep, I do too.
Is that like, so our more permanent content, like
is a page,
yep. And then stuff that's more rotational is a post. Is that a good way to look at it? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. From an SEO standpoint, it doesn't matter one bit.
Okay.
Right. Like Google doesn't distinguish between whether something is called a post or whether something is called a page. It matters only for you in terms of whether it's part of your main navigation or maybe sub navigation, basically. Like posts end up being like, you might have 100 posts under your blog, right? And then they have tags attached to them so I can search them that way. So yes, from an SEO standpoint, if I do both as well, of course, on my sites, and the Yoast piece shows up identically, right? Like you still get the keywords, you still get sort of that ability to generate your title tags, your description tags, and to get that check on how well your content is doing. Any other quick questions?
Yes, apropos of Wix, Wix has a whole bunch of that stuff embedded in the programming already. Like when you put it up, it's already got a bunch of that stuff. Have you ever heard of using Yoast in intersection with Wix?
No, Yoast is a plugin for WordPress. And Wix has a lot of built-in functionalities right on the page you're creating. You just need to
Yes.
know that you need to click on the thing called SEO. And I think it might be
Exactly.
in a sub-navigation, right? And then
It's in
right
here.
in that little window, you get all of these items, right? That it allows you to fill them
Yes.
all in.
It does. It also
Right,
gives you it'll give you the social media feature. It'll give you an image
Yep.
uptake. It has all of that's built in the actual program.
Yep.
Okay. It
Yep.
doesn't give you the, you're doing a great job though. But it does show you exactly what what Google is showing you.
Exactly.
So you can tell it gives you the reading that is on Google, but
Yep.
all the other stuff about your writing capacity and stuff like that is that Yoast thing is not comparable for Wix, is what you're. So you have to figure out how to do that separately, all by yourself.
And then other tools, like if you're using, I don't know, Square, whatever that's called, Foursquare or Squarespace, or I don't know the other tools, they're more or less sophisticated around that. And you may need to supplement with something other stuff in terms of some of the, other kind of like data meta tagging that, or metadata information that you might need. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we come down to structured data, sort of not in the fundamentals part of our sessions, but a little bit later on, early in the new year. And there's tools to do that, but you may actually have to work in the code of the site a little bit to implement some of that.
There's a question from Rachel in the chat.
Okay.
I can read it out, or Rachel, if you just want to unmute yourself and ask away.
Sure. Okay, so I have never maintained a website before other than a Mac-based website, which is like easy peasy. So when I took over the Spark website, I couldn't find the pages, like how to change the pages and update them. And they're created as widgets, not pages. And our pages are actually our posts, like our blog posts that we have bloggers that write for us. So I find this clunky and hard to use and hard to organize, but I'm wondering, what is the impact that it has on our SEO that they're set up as widgets, or does it not have an impact?
That's an awesome question that I don't actually know the answer to. I think as long as those widgets generate HTML text, it shouldn't have any impact. But if those widgets are like hidden forms, search engines may have no ability to read them.
Right.
So it would be a matter of, taking a look at that on your site specifically, and trying to assess that.
Okay.
It's a very unusual way to build a website, not one I would recommend, obviously.
That's what I thought, but I'm like not techie, like I'm not a coder or anything. So I thought, well, maybe it's just me, like maybe I'm really out of touch, but
no, not at all. Not at all. That's very unusual. I don't know what the reason is why they would have done that. But it might be part of why your site is a little bit clunky and weird and hard to maintain and all that.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't want to do that. And I'm not sure what it's built in either, like if it's a custom build or if it uses something like a Wix or a WordPress.
It's WordPress, and it looked very similar to your setup that you just showed us, except everything's listed under widgets, which is
okay. That makes no sense at all.
Okay, thanks.
That should all be pages.
Thank you.
That's a quick answer on that. I think we're at the end of our time here. So I'm hoping that, this approach to trying to get at content might be a little bit unusual. I'm pretty sure that you all know how to write, right? So that wasn't my purpose. I want to make sure that you learn to construct web pages in a more meaningful way. And the last sort of thing around that, it's a summary slide in the deck. When you go look at that, you'll see this, and this is just a reminder of what I think your ideal writing process looks like. So it's keywords, page URLs, your title tag, the keyword rich formula that you apply there. Your main theme of the page should always be in a heading 1, H1 tag, like what the page is about. And then other headlines, are just there to scan the page really well. So H2, H3, they're just headline things. Then you look at your body text. Then you look at your editorial imagery, still a video, and you make sure they have image alt tags attached to them, both for accessibility and for the search engines to make sure that you're using keyword rich stuff so that you're get sort of the recognition and the elevation on the search engine. And then, once you've finished your page, your text and all that, go back to your keywords, right? Because if by chance you didn't use your keywords in actual words, you might have to change them. Or either in the body text you've written, or just in the description tag, title tag that you're using. Google's got to look for congruence there, right? Like you can't just say Coke when you really what you mean is what your page is about is Pepsi, right? So they look for congruence between the keywords that you're using and the keywords you actually used. And then you hit publish. So it's a kind of a upside down process for writing that you may not be as used to, but it'll actually speed up your process in the long run because your pages will be better. And you don't, if somebody else is implementing some of that stuff, as is Michelle's case, you'll also have a better relationship with them that is much more reliable. So that's the last piece I wanted to leave you with today.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to send them by email to this email address, which is I've just put in the chat. And you can also check out the project page for the slides that were used today, as well as the homework for next week. Again, it's only meant to take about 15 minutes, and it's just to get you in the right mindset for what we're going to talk about next week as well. Thank you so much, Inga, and thank you for Canada Council of the Arts for supporting these workshops. And we will see you again next week.